Hello, I'm Alexa. You're listening to Adaptive by Design, and today I'm talking with my past colleague and friend, Crystal Pang. Crystal is a UX researcher at Atlassian, but before that, she was at Rivian Automotive, Zendesk, that's where we met, Spotify, and Accenture Interactive. I'm excited for our conversation today because I can't wait to chat more about the important relationship designers and UX researchers have. But before we get into that, let's talk about you, Crystal. Now, I did snoop around a bit on your online profiles and didn't realize until now that you had a number of roles in marketing before getting into UX research. Is that right?
Yes, so my major in college, I went to NYU. It was like a DIY program, NYU Gallatin. So I was doing a little bit of something funky. It was like food marketing. So trying to understand like how food companies market stuff. And so that's why I was like, oh, let me get into marketing. And living in New York, I had a bunch of internships in like the entertainment business, like Disney and NBC and stuff like that. So it wasn't officially like salaried. It was definitely internship paycheck to paycheck. But that is kind of where I thought I was going to go before I wanted to go into tech.
That's cool. That seems like some really cool opportunities too, Disney and like all of that. What was that like then, those internships?
It was really cool because I think when you think about Hollywood, you're like, oh, like, is this actually what happens behind the scenes? Like, we got to go on set. So I did a lot of like ad sales and marketing internships. So a lot of that was like on behind a computer. But because we were interns, they like do a lot of programs where it's like, oh, like come see like the Daily Show live or like come watch these things live. And then I also got to meet production interns who like are ones who physically are like lifting up all the cords and helping out. So it's definitely a different world because it was so starstruck, I think, versus now my day to day, I'm like, yeah, this is cool. Like, but this is still software versus then there's like a lot of physical elements and then you can talk about your work and other people are impressed.
That's so, yeah, because like now we're like sitting at our desks all day. It's like totally different environment than being like on a production set. Wait, so you were studying, you were doing, in college, you were studying marketing food. You had like a marketing and food focus. How did that translate then into the roles on set?
So a lot of it, so I wanted to work in the food space. So my goal was originally to work at Food Network. So I was kind of a little bit of a long plan. Like I worked at CNBC for a bit and I was like, all right, they have like some like shows related to like making money for restaurants and stuff. So I was like, okay, maybe I'll go there. I worked at like Sesame Street because I was like, oh, they have like a nutrition program. So I did like this weird like puzzle thing where I was like, I hope I can work at Food Network. And then I finally interned at Scripps Network, which was the owner of Food Network at the time. And now it's all Discovery. But in Discovery Communications. So that was kind of the goal. And I was like, what skills do I actually have? And what am I actually good at? And at NYU was more of the marketing space. So really the production stuff was mostly for fun when I could help out or like talk to my friends about it. But really the day-to-day was in the kind of like, hey, how do we market the show? Both brand marketing, how do we distribute the show to other channels and stuff like that. So it was a short-lived dream, mostly because I think I realized quickly that in the entertainment world, you work a lot. And I saw my other friends in finance and my husband, he was in the business school. Like they just were making a lot more money for the different kind of work that they were doing. And then I got kind of greedy towards the end of graduation. And I ended up actually choosing a management consulting path, which is then kind of how that got me into research. So really, it was totally unexpected. Like I think a lot of people's careers, because I still think my heart still goes for like entertainment. Like in my dream world, I'm a writer, like for a TV show. But, you know, gotta be realistic, pay the bills a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, maybe like another like 10 or 20 years from now, it could be like another lifetime you have that you're like a writer for a really cool like food TV show.
It's true. And then by then I'll have more lived experiences to write about.
Exactly. It'll all work out, Crystal. Okay, well, let's talk about that then. So you ended up getting into marketing right after college. How did you end up discovering UX research then from that path?
So I was doing marketing at a management consulting firm a little bit. So it was so even though I had studied it, I chose a more general career path. So management consulting, I worked at Accenture. It's really kind of in the name itself. So our job is to help executives and other leadership levels make these like big strategic decisions. And so my specialty was kind of like, hey, I know a lot about like this marketing space. Like, let's see if we can help with that. But because you're out of college, when you first do management consulting, it's kind of like just do whatever is available because you want to get staffed on something and make the company money. And I first actually ended up on a telecommunications client and we were building out a chatbot for them, like an artificial intelligent chatbot. And then
how long was this like before its time? I feel like AI and chatbots are like so hot right now.
It was very early. And I remember hearing from people that they hated it. Like no one trusted a bot, which is very different now versus everyone's like a bot should tell me what to do. So it was a little bit interesting, and that's kind of how I got into it. So this client was like, hey, we want to do a chat bot because then we can save money at our call center, right? We can then kind of have less live agents, and then also the easier stuff can be automated. So we were hired to build that out for them. So very much like a tech ask, but I was on the customer experience team, and they were building out the actual like flows that go into it. But we weren't talking to any users. And I had taken a couple like grad courses in college and like unshadowed some classes and learned. I knew stuff about like design thinking and design research. And I was like, hey, like, why aren't we talking to customers? And our client was very much like, hey, we already have like quantitative data. Like, let's not waste time with that. Let's continue this way. And so I had pitched it to my manager being like, hey, like, I heard of this thing called user research. Like, maybe we should try it. Let's actually talk to some customers and like, can we design a study around this? And there was a little bit of skepticism, partially because I gave the pay participants and we didn't have that kind of budget. So I kind of like ad hoc did it. I used internal employees who weren't part of the project and like showed them the bot and be like, hey, like, how would you improve this? What do you think about it? And then it kind of caught on. Like we got cool insights from that, not in any official way that I could probably be proud of today, but definitely like, oh yeah, like if we talk to users and design studies around improving experiences, like it actually makes the product better and therefore making our client more happy, right? So that's kind of how I got the taste of it, just being on a customer experience team. And then my manager giving me the chance to really explore what like user research is. But it went into a little bit more of me wanting to find more like real research, almost real researchers to learn from and like real groups. So within Accenture, I actually worked at 2 different agencies that they acquired. And that's kind of where I got the real training.
So like you discovered UX research on your own, and then that led you to your interest in exploring it like in a more career focused sort of way. Is that right?
Yeah, I was actually staffed on this project for the chatbot for like a year and a half. And then I remember Accenture had acquired a really cool service design firm called Fjord. And that was like the hottest thing back then, service design. Like, what is that? Like, that's the future. And so I really wanted to be in it. And I had kept networking with people. I was like, hey, like, would you like take on like, I honestly like a 22-year-old, right? 21-year-old who just graduated college. And then eventually someone got back to me and was like, hey, we actually need someone like who has a business mindset on this specific project. Like, can you come on? So I had to go to my manager and be like, I have to leave this project to go do this. And I was worried that she would not support me because it's kind of a risky decision in consulting. If you have like a good project that you really are learning a lot from, like, why would you leave it? But she was like, oh no, like go for it. Like, I know you really want to do research and like, that's like the golden egg or whatever for research, like kind of working at a cool service design agency. So I went there, got some real training on that. And then I learned how I really wanted to know more like usability research or more of the tactical research, since service design is more like blue skies, long-term vision. And then I went to another e-commerce agency that Accenture had acquired out of Austin called Clearhead. And then there, that team really helped me get like the volume and experience for more methodologies that real user researchers use.
This is great. I didn't know, or I didn't realize you had so much experience in customer service and like customer support teams, because like that makes a lot of sense how you ended up at Zendesk, because you have all of that past experience. Yeah, makes a lot of sense now. Okay, so that's so cool. You know, a lot of people I think who are trying to get into UX design and UX research these days, they often like come from like sort of like different paths or careers, and so it sounds like you did a lot of self teaching or like teaching on the job to get yourself there? Or did you end up also taking some programs or some classes where you were able to like learn some of those what has led you to get to the experience that you needed to land an official job, like let's say at Zendesk, where you were an actual applying for a UX research position?
I think what was unique about my position is that because you're in an agency, you're working on all different types of clients. It's very fast paced and there's like a lot of different quantity of projects. So there was a lot of learning on the job. I kind of got the legitimacy from my manager, who had kind of like studied it more formally. He used to be a designer and then like got into research himself. And then it was kind of like, hey, is this right? Like, are my instincts correct? And then he would kind of help shape me there. And of course, there's all these like materials online that are free and accessible. So I definitely leveraged like what's out there and got, I think, the volume of training from working with so many clients. Like, I think when you're in-house, oftentimes you're working on with like one project, maybe 2 to 3 big projects every quarter. But like when I worked in the agency side, it's very much like 5 to 10 like every like quarter, because you're really working so much and working so quickly. Yeah. And so I think that really felt like I was working many lifetimes of research jobs there. But I think what you're saying about getting that legitimacy is very much valid, because I was worried in consulting, it's a very separate world than tech. And so I was worried that there's like a stereotype that, oh, you won't be a real researcher if you don't have a PhD. You're not a real researcher if you don't work at like a real tech company. So I actually jumped ship from Accenture and took a contractor role at Spotify, which was a little bit risky because, again, full-time job, health insurance. Now I'm going for a contractor role, but I knew that a role at Spotify, which is a very established tech company, and also has a really strong user research practice, especially and partnered with qualitative and quantitative perspectives, would kind of help me see, one, if I was just really not knowing what I was doing, or two, like I do know what I'm doing, I'm good at what I'm able to do, and then kind of get that check mark in the industry. So I took a 1-month contractor role, leaving my full-time job, and then it had extended to a few more months. And then after that, I found my first full-time doing research at Zendesk, and then more jobs after that. But it was a little bit serendipitous, but also a little bit risky, but very much like doing the work, learning on the job, and then making sure it's correct through a lot of self-Googling and searching.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about like interviewing for UX research roles later on. So we'll maybe come back maybe to that like the role you got with Spotify, because that'll be really interesting to learn more about. But I wanted to also just talk about more of like the day-to-day life working with designers, because again, a lot of people are listening to this podcast are interested in careers in UX design. Some of them might be interested in UX research and are trying to figure out what the difference is between the two. So I was wondering if you could help me understand or help describe what your role is as UX researcher and how that compares to what the role of your colleagues in UX design.
Yeah, I think I always kind of saw it as research as kind of being the voice of the customer versus design is more executing and translating that voice. And of course, there's a lot of similarities in terms of thinking about the user's best experience and perspective. But I think what's also interesting is that customers or users don't often know what they want. So like us specialists have to fill in those gaps. So even though research is like the voice of the customer, it isn't like a one-to-one transcription service. It's very much identifying what they don't know they want, what things they need, and then kind of making sure that that is something that we can execute on with designers. So it's their voice with a little bit of digging.
Yeah. And I guess like how would you describe what a week is like in your life then? Like what are some examples of the types of research studies that you're leading, and what is your role in that? And then, how do you work with your designer colleagues on those studies?
Yeah, I think every day is different, which I know is a pretty common answer from a lot of people. But I think with research, it is a little bit easier to boil down because it depends on what phase of the project you're in. So I think with research, you often start out with like scope planning. So let's say, let's do an easy example. Let's say a designer has a page that they want to make sure is that will do what the users want, or we want the users to do. Let's say if it's like a checkout experience or something pretty straightforward. And so if the designer has this and they're like, hey, we want to get this out in a few months, but we want to make sure it works with users, then I'll work with the designer there to be like, okay, what are these designs? What are we thinking about? What questions do we have? What are the areas we think, there may be opportunities to improve something? And so then we kind of have like this more collaborative session where we're talking about something. After that, I'll kind of take all that, translate that into a research plan, and then go off and actually execute the work. So that really means like recruiting, testing the study, being in the field with users. So in a lot of my experiences now, it's through Zoom or watching them do experiences, but it could also be something sexier, like being in the field, being physically out in the wild with them. Like, for example, when I worked at Rivian and we were studying cars, so like being with people in their cars and seeing how they drive and what their experience is like. So that's kind of like that field work experience. Then you take all that data, you have to analyze it. We have a bunch of tools for that. And then we have to translate that over into something that the designers and the product teams can actually action on. So whether that's like a report or just like clips of videos that kind of put empathy into about the user there and stuff like that. So those are kind of like the few phases that go in there. I think collaboration with designers is super important, because if I just did something on my own and disappeared for 4 weeks and came back to you and was like, here's what I found, you're probably like, hey, that's already changed. Like, what are you doing? Why are you telling me to do my job? So I think at every step of the way, it's like, hey, what are we testing? What do we care about? What timelines do we have to meet? And like, what can we do together? And kind of iterating and riffing off each other is definitely a point there. And I think that's definitely especially true in more of these like tactical studies we want to do, where we want to get a specific result for the design team. But it could also be very open-ended, where it's like, what is the future of purchasing? For example, if we're talking about shopping carts, like what is the future of the checkout experience? And the designers may be like, hey, I don't really have a design. I have ideas about what people like. And then we can talk through like what questions and things they want to know so that they can then translate that into actual designs.
Yeah, that like research brief or like that planning document that happens at the very beginning of a project is so important to create alignment on to figure out like what to do next. I guess like how do you guide then the designers or the other people, like the other stakeholders on the team around like what type of research that you think is required to get to the answer that we need for the project?
It again will depend. So I think it's there. We can design a study that answers any question really, but I think it also depends. Like, are we asking the right question? So I think it's before even the document is like, what is the right research question or what are we thinking about? So oftentimes there's like a good framework that I think researchers like to use of like risk versus effort. So I think the best time that a researcher can kind of come in is when it's like a high risk project, and it's like if we were to just build it and test it in the wild, it could have it could be detrimental to the company if it fails, right? So like let's get research in there so we de-risk the situation and figure out like what we can do to make sure it goes off successfully. So I think definitely we can design any type of methodology or study. We can do a survey, and there are some methodologies that are better at different phases of the project, of course, and like the fidelity of things. And we can talk about that in very specific details per project. But I think if we're not even asking the right question, then it will just kind of get us into like a loop. And of course, budget and timeline makes a difference too.
Yeah, absolutely. It all depends. Okay, so you're talking about your time at Rivian Automotive and how you were actually like out in the field driving in cars with people who are actually using like the cars were like the product where the product was, right? Can you share more about that experience? Especially since we're all online these days in tech, it sounds like so fun and interesting to like actually be out there and like driving with people using the product.
Sure. So the project that I was specifically thinking about is actually we were thinking about the next generation of the car, actually. So there are researchers who very much are researching the current experience of the car and the technology that's in there. But the project that I was supporting here was actually about the next version. And so we really wanted to understand user behavior in like the certain kind of car that we're going after. So we would sit with actual drivers of cars that we think we would be pretty similar to or compete against. And then be like, hey, like, what does this mean to you? Like, how do you drive your car? Like, how do you take care of it? Basically, like how the car relates to identity. And it was very open-ended. We also went into their homes and then kind of saw how they lived. And they talked about like their family and their lifestyle and how their vehicle kind of helps them get there. So like, for example, we were speaking to a mom and then she goes to the park quite often with her children, and Rivian really, is targeting kind of that more adventurous outdoor space because of the current brand it has. And so like she uses her vehicle for loading bikes and loading like different things for her kids and kind of seeing like the storage space she needs, like what kind of additions she adds to her car, the schedule, how it fits into it. So all of that stuff. So it's like very open-ended, but intentionally so, but then it kind of comes together in a nice like building of a persona or thinking about what we can really learn from there.
Yeah, it just sounds super interesting and just like, I haven't done in-person research study in a really long time since we've been online for so long. So it's just refreshing. And it sounds like it would just be like a cool experience to meet a lot of like interesting people too, like that could benefit from your business.
Yeah, and it's definitely, there's different challenges when you're in person. Like with Zoom, you can easily record stuff, but like in person, like it might be awkward to be, holding a GoPro to their face. And so like you learn all these different tips and tricks too. And a lot of the specialty I had at Rivian was specifically about like the service experience. So like how people actually get their vehicles serviced, like mechanics almost. And so like kind of going to their space and seeing like how the parts and the tools work and stuff is also very interesting.
Yeah. Can you talk more about that then? Like how were you collecting data or recordings or all of that when it came to those like in-person sessions?
Yeah, so we had some like designated GoPros for these kinds of experiences so we can store it. So like, for example, when I'm in let's say like the mechanic studio for the easiest like understanding, like these people who are repairing the vehicles are moving around, right? So it's like, it's hard to get them sitting down for 30 minutes to talk to me because they have like 10 vehicles to work on and they're paid hourly and they're not really thinking about research in the way that I'm thinking about research. So really like having a GoPro, like either like you're holding it sometimes, you can't really take notes like physically on a page, that becomes difficult. So you kind of have to know points you're looking for. Like you don't have as much of a script typically because you don't have like that laptop experience in front of you. So kind of knowing the key points and going around there, sometimes printing it out as well just to have it. But then knowing what to watch first. So like I watched someone do all the different checks that go into something before the vehicle is ready for delivery, and then seeing like which tools he used, recording those sessions when he answers, just having all that recorded. But
So
definitely
a lot more
yeah,
like note taking and like having to go back and like kind of analyze and it like later point in time versus like when you're on Zoom, maybe you can like do it more easily like in that moment.
Yeah, and I think you see how the physical space interacts with the digital space, because a lot of the things I work on are digital solutions for the supplement the physical space. So like they have their checklist on the computer, but they're also inside the car, and like how that kind of works with them.
Right. So okay. So at Atlassian, then you're doing a lot more Zoom research calls, right?
Yeah.
Can you just talk more about that experience then, and like some of the challenges maybe that come with doing Zoom calls as well?
I think so. At Atlassian, it's a little bit different because our users are very specialized technical admins usually, or like technical users in general. And so they have their day job where they're trying to do their job. And so when we recruit them, they very much want to help us because it helps their lives. So it's like they're way more motivated to kind of support, and which is awesome. Makes my research a lot easier. But with Zoom, it's like we would share our screen and we would make sure like they can access everything, and then we record it. I think the biggest challenges when you get with these kind of bigger customers and clients is like security and making sure everyone's data is protected. And those are where the challenges really come in, where it's like, hey, if we want to see like how they use our tool, but it has all this customer data, like we can't, right? We have to be careful. We have to make sure we're not breaking any regulations or laws and storing anything incorrectly. So I think that's where it becomes more of a challenge. Versus in person, it was more like I'm running around and trying to like make sure everything's captured. It's just that making sure I'm following all the protocol while still doing the best work and not making it too much of a hassle.
Yeah, very interesting. So you've got all this research and now you want to deliver it back to the team, deliver it back to the designers so that they can use it to make better informed design decisions. What does that look like? And, could you just describe a little bit for us, what that looks like?
I like to give what's best, what is the most needed. So because there's no benefit to me to writing this really fully long, like 30-minute report if no one is going to read it. And it's like if you need to make a quick decision and it's like you just need a one pager or like a couple paragraphs that explain it with some proof points, that I can deliver that to you. If this is more of like a stakeholder alignment session where it's like we have 10 people who don't agree on something and then this research is going to help inform it, and maybe their best way they learn or do things is through presentations, like then I'll create a presentation, right? So I think There's no single way of creating like a deliverable. Of course, it's like good to have a rapport just for long-term longevity so that people can reference things like that. But for me, especially in a collaborative, fast-moving environment, it's about making sure the insights are actionable and learnable and that you're actually going to look at. Because there's no point if it's on the shelf. There's no benefit to me, to you. It's like it'd be a waste of everyone's time.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you ever working on projects without designers?
Yes, I'm currently working on a project with product marketing, for example.
Oh, okay. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so we're thinking about best ways to like price and package one of our offerings. And so that and it's like something, and our goal is to, make more money basically, as any company's goal is. So with designers, like I think a lot of them are specific to projects or like specific to products. So they're like really trying to build out. So it isn't like we know what the future of this version of the product is going to be. It's more like where can it go? How can we package it? How can we better target our customers to make sure it's getting to who actually would care about this information? And so I'm talking to customers, seeing about like their journey on this purchase path, for example, and then product marketing is going to use it to build personas and to better target, and then work with like the sales teams to kind of better package and think about selling the product in different ways. And of course, if we were doing a big transformation after we learn all these things, like, hey, actually it makes sense to maybe like on the website, it should package it like this way, and there should be different designs on that. Like I think design can kind of be looped in, but this isn't like one team specifically trying to change something or build something out, so there's less design in this case.
I guess just from like an org chart perspective, how did you find yourself working on this project then?
I think just like any other times, like we are really thinking about ways to help the company, ways to like help the company out in like a high scale, I guess. Because I think it's easy to do your one product and you're like, okay, cool, I did it, put a bow on it, do my next little project. But really, how can we make the most impact is that if we can help the business overall. And so kind of seeing what projects were already out there. And this is actually partnered with product marketing and data science. So I'm actually partnered with a data scientist here who has been working on this project and then was like, hey, I have a lot of the what is happening, but not so much the why. So like, how can we work together to get the why?
Yeah. Well, I resonate with that too, because I think we've been talking a lot about this at Zendesk recently. Like, we don't want to be shipping our org chart. That's kind of like what we say, just because like we're organized internally in this way. We don't want that to reflect like in like our product or in the experiences. So actually the team I'm working on now, we're also working really closely with product marketing and other like non-product development typical like roles within the company. So I super resonate with that. I was just kind of curious, how did you find yourself working on that team? And I think maybe we'll see a lot more of that overlap happening in the industry for that very reason.
Yeah, and I think what's unique about researchers is that because we're so cross-functional, sometimes we see the gaps that when you're a little bit more siloed that you don't, like when your head's down in your little product area or I said your org chart, you're not really thinking about this other area. But because even though I may be embedded in one team, like I still talk to others to kind of learn what I need to know. And so I'm like, hey, like this is actually something this other team is working on. Like, let's be that connector. So sometimes as a researcher, you have that benefit of seeing things a little bit more holistically.
Yeah. Okay. So when people are starting off, especially with like learning UX design for the first time, they're typically learning some level of UX research or having like learning some level of UX research skills. So I was curious what your thoughts are on that, and like what sort of research do you find designers can typically learn to lead themselves, and then contrast that with like what are some more technically challenging research studies that you think would be better off run by a UX researcher?
So this is actually like a hot, like controversial topic, I think, among researchers right now, like the democratization of research and like how much how much we should kind of give away almost. And so this is going to be my personal philosophy. And of course, other people can have different opinions. But I think for me is that I don't think that researchers are the only people who should talk to customers. So that's like the first thing, right? It's like, I don't want to be a gatekeeper. I don't want to make things harder or be a bottleneck for anyone. So designers, product, like they should still talk to customers in their own way. But I think the problem or the areas I see can get confusing or messy is that when we call it research, I think because with research, it is a certain methodology, it's craft, it's something that's been done for like years, even beyond like the tech world, right? There's like certain things that have to be followed. And if not, it's not really research. Like I think we can talk to customers in any way to get feedback and learn about it because that will put you closer to who you're building for, which is always important. But that's not really research. I think the second thing is also that a lot of designers I know chose design for a reason. Like they don't want to be researchers. Like there's a lot of nitty gritty, a lot of rules that they're like, oh, like not that interesting to them. And a lot of my like colleagues who are researchers have PhDs. They went to school for years, so they have like a different perspective, and I think you worded it nicely. It was like technically challenging. Like there's that element too, but it's also like there's an element of making sure it's done correctly and right, because sometimes bad research is worse than no research at all, because that can very much sway people's perspectives, or you're trying to validate something that is just incorrectly, and then you think you have all these like great insights, but it could be totally wrong. But still saying that, I think where designers can really shine is kind of more of those like tactical questions where it's like, hey, I just need to choose between design A and B. Like no matter which way I go, it's not going to break the company, but like, I just want to make sure like I choose one that maybe is more optimal. And so like, that is where I think doing some more of those tactical questions, like usability studies to make sure things are functioning correctly, is where designers can kind of go off in their own or with the support of a researcher to execute those, because those are kind of quick wins that you're getting from it, low risk, and still a way to make sure things are being seen by users before you're just kind of choosing in your own echo chamber. So I think that's where I would say is the kind of limit that I think it'd be best for designers to kind of go off on their own. And then I think the researchers' benefit is, of course, that they can do kind of those bigger questions where you're not thinking about 2 years out because you're really much focused on your area and you don't want to see that fail. And so like thinking about what's next or what's after like the beta or what's after the GA, for example, and then researchers can kind of come in. So I don't think there's like there are certain methodologies that are definitely more complicated than others, but it's more about, I think, the impact of what doing bad research or doing like half-assed research could be, for at least for me.
Oh, I have a lot to think about with that. That's really great. I think especially like, okay, like what, like when it comes to like recruiting participants too, like, is that something that is better off like left to the UX research team? Or, can a designer lead something in that as well? Like, what is your perspective on when it comes to recruiting?
So definitely depends on the size of the company. I know with recruiting, some like at least even at Zendesk, we have research ops who kind of handle all that. It's just a little bit tricky because when you speak to participants who are your users, you're almost a representative of the brand. And so if you're not really trained in that, or you have your own agenda, which is to get them to like your own designs, for example, it can put you in an awkward position, right? Because they could be very critical about something and you want to explain why you did something as a designer. But like no matter how, but in the real world scenario, like that user wouldn't have you like whispering the instructions to them. And so it may not feel like it's a true experience where you're getting the feedback you want. So so that's a little bit less about recruiting, but I think, it's like making sure that we aren't using the same people and exhausting their time. There's rules like around that, making sure, of course, like they're in positions that can accept compensation, because we do try to compensate our users. That's just general good practice, making sure we like store their information correctly and safely. And it's not just like anyone can just access all their private data. So there's all these, so it's not that I think designers can't do it, is that no matter anyone who has a recruitment panel, like there needs to be guardrails to protect our users, because trust is everything. And if we're just, abusing that, then it's overall bad for the company.
Yeah. Even just like making sure that someone is in one of your customers isn't in like an opt-out list of communications from you. And like if you reach out to them, all of a sudden they're like, why am I getting, like, I opted out of this. Like, why is someone reaching out to me from the company? So being aware of all of those like policy and the legality of it is like critical.
Yeah. But I think together with designers, like designers and researchers can really build like these rich artifacts together. So I think that hopefully when you have enough of these artifacts that you create, you kind of know more about the user and that you feel more connected to. Like, for example, I'm thinking about like jobs to be done, or like personas building together, or journeys like together. I think you can really have some powerful tools that help long term.
Excellent. Let's talk a little bit about interviewing for user research positions. Maybe we could start back when you interviewed for that role as a contractor at Spotify. I think that's super interesting. What do you remember about that time and what that interview was like?
Oh, I remember it was embarrassing. They were like, hey, can you show me your portfolio? And I was like, what? And now to me, that seems super obvious. But for me, a portfolio was always a designer's thing. And I was like, I'm not a designer. Why do they want to see a portfolio? So I think I had like maybe 3-hour notice. The recruiter was like, oh, they're going to want to see your portfolio. And I was like, okay. So I put together like slides, basically like 1-page sliders of case studies, basically that we had used at Accenture to like kind of market what research can do. And I was like, I'll just like do something similar for my interview. And then I shared that. And then I was upfront with them. And I was like, hey, honestly, like this is the first time I'm doing this. And they're like, okay, that's weird, but sure. They shared it. And I was like, is that good enough? And they're like, yeah, it works. So I think it still captured what they wanted to know, which is when you're doing the interview is like ways of thinking around research, like your perspective of working collaboratively. Like, are you going to be easy to work with or difficult, right? Like, are you going to include them in the process? Why you made certain decisions. So I think as long as that was all captured, the way the portfolio was created or how in-depth it was not as important. But definitely that kind of shocked me. But now after doing many more interviews over the years, it's easier.
So you say that would be typical then for user research positions, is to have a portfolio and make sure to have some slides prepared to be able to like help the team visualize exactly how the studies went?
Yeah, usually they're like, hey, you have like 45 minutes to an hour to present. They want to know basically 2 to 3 projects that kind of showcase the ways you think, like the breadth of your work, the type of work you've done. Yeah, so that is very typical.
That's just like design too. Yeah.
Okay. But it doesn't need to be in a presentation, but probably similar to designers. Like I've seen people do it through Miro. I've seen people do it in different ways. So as long as it's like showing the message you want, then I think it doesn't have to take a certain format. But I have seen presentations being the most common.
And are there any like technical questions that typically come up for these user research interview roles?
There's usually a technical interview and, of course, technical questions embedded through that. So usually it's they give you a prompt, like a fake prompt, and then they want you to design a study around that. So they'll give something very high level, like, for example, like, let's say you work at a pet food company and your CEO wants to create an app or something to create a pet's history or track it, all that. So that we can sell more food to them. Like, how would you go about creating a research plan to see what the first version of the service would look like? And it's like a paragraph. It's kind of like school. Like, here's a paragraph. Like, what would you do? Sometimes places will ask you, sometimes the interviewer will stay on the call and you can ask them follow-up questions. Other times they will be like, hey, I'm going to drop off for like 30 minutes and then I'll get back and we'll talk about it. So I know that can be a very nerve-wracking part of the interview for a lot of people because you're expected to create this like fully fledged research plan with very limited data in a very short period of time. So I think both being an interviewee and interviewer of these situations is just looking mostly like why you made these decisions, what you're thinking about. And then when you're pushed against like, why did you make that? You don't just, automatically go into lie or say something strange. It's just really like they want to see how you're thinking and why you're thinking. It's not about like how pretty your presentation is or how pretty your research plan is or anything like that. But there is a technical round.
Yeah. So for someone who's going into this for the first time, like what would you recommend how they could best prepare themselves for that session?
I think you can start with something very tangible and easy on the day to day. Like just ask if someone's like trying to create something or ask like your friends, be like, hey, like someone might be like, hey, I want to open up like a restaurant. Like, do you think people would like, for example, I always wanted to open up like a vegan Singaporean restaurant. I'm like, oh, do you think people would like vegan Singaporean food? And you're like, can you design a study that you think could test that? And then there you're automatically like, okay, like how many people should I talk to? Like what types of people? Maybe I should talk to people in the neighborhood I'm thinking about. And then you kind of go down the line of like how can you get the answer? So even practicing on that stuff, if you don't have a lot of industry experience, I think is totally fine because it's really about the way you structure the different steps that go into a research plan and like the kind of areas that you're thinking about and methodology and stuff and being able to be quick about it.
Okay. Yeah, that's really good advice, especially for someone who doesn't have a lot of experience, like just kind of trying to come up with some prompts for yourself to go off of, talk out loud, and like kind of go through that whole process of building out a study would be like super beneficial for them. Yeah.
And I think if what can help provide structure if people do like to learn this way is looking at other research plans because it usually has all the different like buckets of items that go into one, and then you can then kind of structure your thinking that way. So it's like the context, like the timeline, how your recruiting methods are, like stuff like that.
Is there a place you could like redirect people if they wanted to like find a list of some of those, or is it like kind of like finding portfolios, online of researchers you look up to?
That's what I do. I usually am just Googling, and I think I have been spoiled because in the agency side, I made so many research plans at such a fast pace that I'm like, oh, I can do this pretty easily. But I know it's also the high pressure of the situation where you want to make sure you get everything noted down so people can see like how smart you are. That can get you stressful too. So I think it's the element of like practice in that kind of templated form of structured form of thinking, but also the kind of navigating the pressure of producing something quickly and showing how smart and why you should hire me kind of thing.
Yeah. A lot of it comes down to repetition. And this is the same in design as well. So you're talking about just even like, when you were during your consulting days, it sounded like you did a lot of research, a lot of like different research studies. And so I'm just kind of curious, like, do you have a favorite one that you've enjoyed working on the most? And like, does that often show up in your portfolio, or like, what was your portfolio being filled with when you were interviewing for the role at Atlassian?
So since we both met at Zendesk, I'll talk about the project that I think you are aware of that I did there, because I do really think it kind of showcases different methods and also like the impact of it. So at Zendesk, they had the question of like basically better knowing their enterprise users, right? Because they want to expand and make more money with the enterprise customer. But Zendesk traditionally had been really successful in the SMB space and some of these more kind of medium-sized companies. And so there's like kind of this knowledge gap where like, what is an enterprise customer? Like, who are they and how can we best serve our product for them? And so that I worked with many teams who were working on features that would be interesting for what they think is enterprise customers, or try to understand like what they're thinking, build that kind of knowledge. And then I did a shadowing session with agents actually. And so I watched agents use the Zendesk platform who were part of these bigger companies, seeing the complexities they had, seeing what they actually want to do. And then I also asked them to track certain tickets over time, which is a diary study, to get data that way of how they use Zendesk. And through there, I actually built out like a pretty rich library of different like personas of our enterprise customers, which I hear is still being used by our teams today, just to kind of understand like, okay, if a company is like this big or this specific company itself, like what do they use Zendesk for, and like how can we learn from that? I also worked with one of our designers who she already kind of had a job to be done for regular agents, but now kind of taking that to the next level of the enterprise agent. So enriching a document that already existed, which was pretty cool. So making sure that the research gets embedded into something that they actually use regularly, even if it wasn't just for this. And then kind of putting all the stakeholders closer to the user. Like I organized like a showing of how our agents were using Zendesk and like let people watch it. I put it like on 3x speed. I did some little voice narration and I showcased it to people. And then I think it's traditionally really tough to get people to watch customers use our product because of all the policies. So they're having that like little experience, even if it's like me narrating it, was helpful to see like, oh, all the pain points of like all the context switching and tab switching and all the workarounds that our agents do and how it can help them out. So I really like that because I think it just really can live on, which is I think the goal for me with research, especially something of these bigger questions. And it was pretty fun too, because you get to see people work in their environments.
Yeah, it's definitely living on, Crystal. I know exactly what you're talking about. So that's so cool. I didn't realize you worked on that project, and we're definitely using that a lot still at Zendesk. It's interesting you brought up video because I feel like, yeah, even like, I mean, video is just so, such a useful medium, I think, in work life for helping people to understand like a story or to better visualize something. And yeah, you and I also have this sort of similar interest where we've gotten into content creation. And I personally have a YouTube channel, and I know for you, you had you had this like vegan eats Instagram account. You also have an account on TikTok for your dog called Stinky Tofu Pup. And for me, it was like, yeah, I got into video a couple years, like 5 years or so back, just to like make videos about talking about product design and educational content online. And I feel like those skills totally translated into my role as a designer. And I like can make videos sometimes, or I'll do a voiceover like describing a design and like send that out. And I get a lot of good feedback on it. So I guess I was just curious, can you tell us more about like how how you got into content creation? And then do you feel like any of the skills translated into your professional life from like overseeing those accounts?
Yes. Okay. So first part of the question is the content creation side. So yeah, I ran a vegan blog when I lived in New York for many years, probably like 7, 8 years. But ever since moving to California, I've kind of stopped that. But I got into it mostly because I wanted to share my love of vegan food and vegan eating out, and also be a resource for people who were vegan and didn't know where to eat, because that was something I definitely went through. So I think and similar to sharing about my dog, it was just like fun content about like raising a puppy, and now he's a little bit older, so the content has slowed down as well. But just kind of like sharing similar things that I think are helpful, because if I had seen a video like that, I'd be like, oh, or that'll be like, that's really helpful. Like I wish someone created that for me. So really it's about being like a resource and helping others out. So I think that's very similar in terms of how I use these skills and the mindset in research, because I think, as we talked about a little bit earlier, like if it's not engaging and people don't read it, even if I put in all this hard work, and then it doesn't, like the impact isn't there, right? Because it's like, then I don't know, you could have Googled it, I guess. Like you could have done anything else. But when you put things into like a digestible format, it doesn't have to be a video, but often that's how people like their attention spans are a little short. And it's like engaging and it's fun, and it's just like outside the traditional norm of like what you view corporate work to be. I think then people are more receptive to it and willing to work with you, and also be like your ally, right? Like if with research, like it's helpful when it spreads, like not like wildfires are bad, but when it spreads, amongst the company, it's good. And that kind of like sharing and resharing, which is very common in video and in content creation, is like you want to go viral almost. So like thinking about how can you create your content, how can you create your like research content to be viral in your own company is something that I often think about. Just because it's something I already try to do with my own hobbies, but something that I think definitely can impact the company and the team.
Yeah, and that's the key to it too. I think it's like how, like kind of the mindset, like how can you make something go viral? And it doesn't have to go viral, but really what I think it's speaking to is like, how can you make it entertaining and, capture someone's attention? Has there been any sort of like piece of research that you worked on at any of these companies where you felt like you were like create something more engaging by using like video or audio or some of these other like content creation skills?
Yeah, I think it even started way back when I was at Accenture then, and that's where I kind of realized it could be powerful, is that we were running all these workshops, and with a workshop, you're limited to the people who's in the room. And it's also, I'm sure it's a lot of work to plan a workshop, but we weren't like capturing the content of like how successful it was and how easy, how informative it is. And so I started taking like videos during the workshop of seeing like the stakeholders and their clients like working, seeing how we all like work collaborative, like all the post-itting. And I think also with our client, they wanted to be more like innovative, like see more innovative. So I captured all that content, put it like some music over it, showed the different phases of what we were thinking, like 20, 30 seconds. And that spread across like our leadership and our team members. And there's like, oh, like, look, we hired Accenture and like they're doing all this awesome work for us. And it's like something that we were already doing. But then when you captured it and put it in this like easy to digest format, you're like, oh, wow, it is really cool. And like, wish I was there. Like, oh, wish we could do more stuff like this. And I did something very similar at Rivian is that I think it's, especially when you're like so spread out, it's easy to like not know what projects are going on. So whenever I did any site visits or was on the field physically, like I just took content, I'll be like, look, like here are employees actually working on the stuff we're building and like seeing it. And it's different than like the 30-second, 1-minute clip of them like saying and answering to a question. It's more like, just like, look what's going on here and like almost like how cool my job is. And then I get people more willing to work with you because they respect kind of what you're doing or almost are jealous. And then they can kind of gravitate to see like, what's this about?
Yeah, it's like a more personalized way of like looking at it.
Yeah, even though of course it's similar to social media, you only share the good stuff, but it is intentional.
There've been a lot more tears, I feel like, on social media over the last like number of years. People are trying to be more real, but it's true. It's still a lot more of like the positive day to day, but it still works. If you have like just any sort of like final advice for someone who's trying to break into UX research, like what would you recommend for them to get started?
I think first things first is to make sure you want to do UX research. I think you and I have talked about this before, is that it's UX is like this term that's kind of almost overused or like overgeneralized. And you're like, oh, I want to be in UX. And you're like, what does that really mean? And so the way I kind of always figured out that I actually wanted to do research and not like design, which, you know, sometimes does research and talks to people, is that I thought about like the worst parts of each person's job. And then I sometimes I just ask my friends, I was like, what do you hate about being a designer? Like, what do you hate about being a researcher? And they kind of just share different things. And I was like, I can deal with that. Like, that doesn't seem that bad to me. Versus when there was a moment I was like, oh, I want to be a designer. And then I joined like these critiques where we talk about, you know, different shades of buttons for a long time. And I was like, this is the worst thing ever. And so for me, then I was like, no, thank you. But even if it's like I'm tagging videos or like getting deep in it, I'm like, this is fine. So I think that's just overall like career advice about like if you actually want to do a job, is to just think about the worst parts of it and just really knowing like the different things you can do in UX too, like content design or like product design, and knowing like the different ways they work together. And I think in terms of breaking in, there's a lot of imposter syndrome. And so pushing past that almost, and I know it's hard, but like there will always be someone who has a PhD. There'll always be someone who's been in the industry for 15 years, you know. There's always going to be someone who seems like they are a better researcher than you, but I think what's awesome about research is that there's so many different skills that go into it, like with stakeholder management, with actual methodology and execution. Like there's all these different parts that make a really good researcher, and like your unique background will make you a good researcher. Like I know a lot of educators who went into research and are like really killing it, you know? So like it's like a path that if you're transitioning into, like don't feel like your past experience will have no relevancy. It does, and just, you know, don't like make yourself seem more junior than you need to be, because all these experiences will transfer over.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I know I'm certainly feeling inspired. I think it's just a good tribute to like, you know, keep going, keep asking questions, keep talking to people. Like if this career path is the one that you want to take, like just keep surrounding yourself with more people and like learning about it, and you'll figure it out along the way. So thank you so much for sharing your story. It's just super interesting. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up? Where can people find you online if they want to learn more about you and connect?
Probably just LinkedIn right now for my professional side, Crystal Pang. You can find me there. Or my portfolio is crystalmpang.com, and it has all my contact info there too. But yeah, reach out whenever. I'm here.
Perfect. Are you still managing the Stinky Tofu Pup?
I am. If you want to see cute dog content of a Labrador, then go find Stinky Tofu Pup on TikTok. And if you want to see some archives of restaurants in New York, then Vegan Eats NYC for Instagram.
Perfect. I'll make sure those are all included in the show notes. Crystal, thank you again so much. This was so fun. I haven't seen you in a while, so it's just like fun catching up too. So thanks again for being on the podcast.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Cool. We'll talk soon, Crystal. Bye. I have massive respect for the UX researchers in my life and the expertise they bring to product development and business. So thanks again to Crystal for coming on today and sharing her experience as a UX researcher. I love how Crystal was able to help describe how the two roles work together. So if you're considering careers in UX, hopefully she was able to help you think a lot more critically about your career. Now, if you're ready to make the next step with your career in design, Springboard offers a 9-month UI UX design bootcamp with one-on-one mentorship, real-world design projects, and personalized career coaching. And it comes with a job guarantee. Use the code ADAPTIVEBYDESIGN to get $1,000 off enrollment for design bootcamps with Springboard. You can find more information in the description below. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe so you can stay up to date as new episodes drop. Again, my name is Alexa, and you've been listening to Adaptive by Design, Living the UX Life. I'll see you next time.